which is part of the way the Institute of African Studies intervenes in hot topics. And we've had a number of topics in the series. And at this time, we are very pleased to be collaborating with the Norman Patterson School of International Affairs. And then in recognition of the very pivotal role played by our graduate students towards facilitating this conversation this afternoon, we have set out a program that is going to be as simple as possible. And then hoping that we can draw you into wider conversations on the topic for the day. I would like to, without much ado, just give you a sense of what this program is about. I would, besides disciplinary remarks, we'll have the director of NIFSIA also make some preliminary remarks as our partner for this. And then we'll invite one of our grad students who has also played a very pivotal role in this to give us a sense of the direction that we're heading with regard to the topic. And then I will be back and do the introductions of our speakers. And we'll give the speakers opportunity to reflect, to share their reflections on the topic with us for about 10 minutes each. After which we'll have 2 or 3 rounds of conversations led by me around some subtopics. Then we will open up the floor for Q&A. So please, we are hoping that we'll have very robust conversations around this hot topic. While we want to point out that we have refreshments out there, I would also like to note that this event is taking place at lunchtime. Some of our have been to be at lunch break. And because we are also Africans who understand the centrality of food to our refreshments, I want to assure you that at 1 o'clock when we take a break, we'll have something heavier than cookies and tea and coffee. I won't say what it is so that you don't I don't set up your appetite too high. But on that, so on that note, I will just make my further remarks to say I'm excited for this opportunity to have this event. And we have one following this on April 2nd, where we'll have April 1st, we have a professional development event with our grad students and the members of our community, faculty members, with a very distinguished speaker from Boston, Professor Nimi Wariboko, who is like a Renaissance scholar with their degrees and specialization and over 30 books in different fields. So we'll be having him as facilitator on the first, be providing more information on that, and also sharing the poster in a while. We're very proud of the work that our students do, and we are always happy to work with them to host events. We couldn't do this without NIFSIA. The director of NIFSIA, who is here represented, and our very good friend, has been a stalwart of the Institute. It seems to me that in my consciousness, there is that continuing overlap between NIFSIA and Institute of African Studies. And I want to thank my very good colleague, my very good friend as well, for supporting this event. Without much ado, I'm going to just ask him to also make his opening remarks or just welcome remarks. Thank you. Over to you, Kelly.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the kind words. I'm always happy to collaborate with the Institute of African Studies on events such as this one. NIFSIA, for those of you who don't know, is the Norman Patterson School of International Affairs and Carleton University. And I'm currently the director of the school. I'll say a few words, and I think I'll preface this by saying that I'm an economist by training, work at the intersection of trade and development, a particular focus on sub-Saharan Africa. I think it's important to keep that in mind because my remarks will be very much based on my own experience of working on African development and also broader issues. I think many of you will understand and probably are aware that we're living in what I would call a very fragmented world, where the forces that shape globalization, um, namely technology, geopolitics, and economic policy, are moving very rapidly. Um, Many countries are now adopting a posture of economic nationalism, um, where they think more about their own interests. I wouldn't go as far as saying that globalization is receding, but I think we can debate this. I think it's more what I would call a change in the way that countries conduct themselves. So if you think about supply chains, they are changing. There's a reconfiguration of countries deal with each other. Uh, and the question then becomes how countries, and particularly in Africa, adapt to this new reality. And that's why we're having STAR. We're seeing rising protectionism around the world. Like I said, economic nationalism, geopolitical tensions between the US and China, but beyond. And so many of the things that we used to take for granted can no longer be taken for granted. And as many of you know, when the Prime Minister went to Davos, made a speech about middle powers, such as Canada, and how they can collaborate together in order to essentially react to what the large or the big powers are doing. And that raises the question about African countries in particular. Which ones are considered middle powers in Africa? We can probably debate who they are, and maybe we know who they are, but then what does that mean for them? But also, what does it mean for the others? Because the African continent, as you know, is made up of many, many countries at different levels of development. I would argue that very few of them could be considered technically middle powers. So I think that raises interesting questions. So I'm looking forward to what the speakers have to say on this and other issues. But once again, I'm very happy on behalf of UCF to co-organize this event, and I look forward to the conversation and of course for questions and answers that will follow. Thank you once again.
Yes, thank you, Terry. I'd like to offer a regret, an apology. I can tell you that I feel very uncomfortable with this all-male panel. It wasn't planned this way. We thought that we would have some balance there, and so unfortunately, one of the advertised speakers, Dr. Yolanda Booker, is unable to join us due to unavoidable circumstances. Dr. Booker is Associate Professor and Canada Research Chair in Afro-Feminist Thought and Political Transformation at Queen's University. Unfortunately, she couldn't join us today, and she sends her regrets to the panelists as well as to the audience. Please do bear with us on that. On that note, I would like to welcome our colleagues who are joining online from different parts of the world. Thank you. Give us a thumbs up so we know that you are hearing us. Can we have thumbs up from those joining us? Yes, there they go. Thanks for joining us. And then we hope that you'll be able to participate with the questions either directly or in the chat when we are done. We want to hear your voices as well. On that note, I will just simply move ahead to introduce our guest speakers who are here. So I have on my right, Firoz Manji. Dr. Manji is a publisher of Daraja Press and adjunct professor at the Institute of African Studies at Carleton University. He is the recipient of the 2012 Nicola Cristobal Gulen Bastita Lifetime Achievement Award from the Caribbean Philosophical Association. He is a Richard von Weizsäcker Fellow at the Robert Bosch Academy, Berlin, former visiting fellow at Kellogg College, University of Oxford. He holds a PhD from the Faculty of Medicine, University of London, and MSc in Dental Public Health, University of London, and a BDS from the University of Newcastle upon Tyne. You wonder how these medical degrees converge in his very, very philosophical mind. He is a Kenyan, but based in Quebec, Canada. Firoz has been a Croatian African diaspora visiting fellow with the Paula Freire project of the University of KwaZulu-Natal, Natal, South Africa. He is a founder and former editor-in-chief of the prize-winning Pan-African Social Justice newsletter and website, Pambazuka Press, Fahamu Books. Previously, Firoz worked as head of Coresia's Documentation, Information, and Communication Center, Dakar, Africa Program Director for Amnesty International, Chief Executive of the Aga Khan Foundation, UK, Regional Representative of Health Sciences in Eastern and Southern Africa for the Canadian International Development Research Center, researcher at the Kenya Medical Research Institute, and lecturer in the Dental School, Faculty of Medicine, University of Nairobi. He is a member of the Editorial Review Board of Global Critical Caribbean Thought, a member of the editorial board of Nokoko, Journal of the East African Studies, Carleton University, and a member of the International Advisory Board of the Journal, Philosophy and Global Affairs. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming Dr. Firoz Manji to the panel. And then I will quickly also introduce the other speaker. I have taken time to look for more robust introduction rather than just a big one, so that we see entry points and the backgrounds with which these reflections are coming for our audience. Dr. Joseph Atta-Mensah served as a principal policy advisor at the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. Dr. Mensah's responsibilities include ensuring that the key policy findings in ECA research are used to support policy implementation by leading teams strengthening the capacity of African Union and its organs, including member states, the African Union Commission, and the regional economic communities, RECs, in deepening and advancing the African Union's agenda of continental integration. He also works on issues of macroeconomics, monetary economics, and economic models. Dr. Atta-Mensah leads teams in providing policy advisory services to national, sub-regional, and regional institutions and assists them in the formulation of strategies, programs, and projects on macroeconomics and monetary economics. I want to quickly put a disclaimer here that I'm not an economist, I'm an artist, but very much excited to be in the presence of my colleagues who are economists and development specialists. Dr. Atta-Mensah also works with his colleagues on regional coordination mechanism, which brings the United Nations together to support the African Union. Dr. Atta-Mensah has also served as Director of Regional Integration, Infrastructure and Trade at UNECA, where he focused on research and analysis on regional integration, infrastructure, and trade policy. Dr. Mensah has represented UNECA at summits of African heads of state, meetings of African ministers, and other high-level conferences and meetings within and outside of Africa. His areas of enterprise of expertise include economics and mathematics, with specific emphasis on credit markets and monetary policy. His recent publications focus on the economic transformation of Africa and the mathematic valuation of corruption and commodity and infrastructural index bonds. Dr. Atta-Mensah holds a doctorate degree in financial economics from the Simon Fraser University in British Columbia, Canada. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Atta-Mensah. So I would like to invite, on behalf of the students who have played pivotal role in putting this together, Ugo Okoye, to give us a few reflections on the thinking that has led this this event. And afterwards, I would also ask Shika to make a remark about the directions that are going as our students, looking at some of these global forces and intersections. Ugo, 2 minutes, yes.
Thank you very much, Prof. And good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Geopolitical. I'm a PhD student in the Department of Sociology and Anthropology. And my PhD program is a geopolitical program, but I'm more interested in issues around governance, development. Most importantly, I also have a strong interest in international politics as well, geopolitics. And part of the thinking that went into putting these events together, borders mostly around some of the activities or some of the events, global event that has been ongoing. And we currently have one going on in the Middle East right now. But young and upcoming scholars and also career professionals, we are sort of not in the midst of trying to make sense of all of this. And as Africans, we're also more interested in understanding how can this, what future does this portend for Africa? One of, like Teddy mentioned, one of the things that actually inspired this program was a speech that Makani gave in Davos, where he talked about the rupture of the current world order as we know it. And one also very interesting remark he made is he talked about the nihilism that characterized the existing world order and how certain countries were beneficiaries of that, even though the world order wasn't as habitable as it is touted to be. And that also got us thinking, now that the world order as we know it has structured and is ongoing in a sense, how can Africa position itself to be on the table and not on the menu, for more uses words. So, and as young scholars, we also thought of how do we begin to reflect on ways in which Africa can play a pivotal role in the emerging world order. And pretty much why we are invested in seeing the success of this. Sort of inviting experts in the various areas, but economics and geopolitics, to come together to also educate the students who I believe we're going to be more like the future of pretty much the future of the continent for us to begin to think of how can we make sense of what is actually going on and how do we position ourselves and by extension the continent to become key players in the emerging world. So we are really excited on behalf of the students. We are really excited to be here and looking forward to a wonderful conversation.
Thank you. And then Chika has also been that other part of the organization and of the Institute of African Studies graduate students. So she is one of the co-presidents or one of the coordinators. And then we'd like to just quickly hear your voice as well.
Okay, sure. So I'm Chika, and I'm a PhD student candidate with the Institute of African Studies in the History Department. And my research interest lies at the intersection of politics and history to interrogate gender inequalities and inequalities in general. And I would say that I've been teaching modern Africa in the past 12 weeks. And it's been interesting connecting past historical events to situate what is happening in our current geopolitics. And I've had students who have been very interested in understanding these global issues and learning to adopt a historical lens and to understand that all that is happening today, it's connected, has historic connections, and to sit with those connections and to understand the deep histories that underline our current geopolitical environment. And so it's this intersection that we are hoping to make today. And I encourage some of my students to be here. And so I'm guessing some of them will be joining online too and participate in this conversation and give as much as we can. Yeah, happy to be here.
Thank you very much. So with these preliminary remarks, I would like to turn to Feroz to give us about 10 minutes reflections on the topic.
Look, I just referred to my background as a dentist in the distant past. It reminds me of when I was interviewed for the position of Africa Director for Amnesty. One of the board members looked at me and said, "Why would a dentist want to work for Amnesty?" To which I replied, "Well, I guess that I know everything there is to know about torture." And they gave me the job. So,
It's a brilliant.
so who is Africa in global negotiations? I mean, first of all, thank you to the Institute of African Studies and the students involved for this invitation. It's a privilege to share this panel with such distinguished colleagues. The question that's being put before us is, how can African countries move from being an afterthought in global negotiations to becoming co-authors of the terms that shape trade and investment? Got that right? haven't I?
Yes, yes.
It's a good question. But in the next 10 minutes, I want to suggest that it might also be perhaps the wrong question, or at least the incomplete one. Because before we ask how Africa can get a seat at the table, we have to ask, which Africa? Whose Africa? And what kind of table are we trying to sit at? Let's start with a premise. Is Africa really an afterthought? Look at the data. The United States has military installations across the continent. Djibouti, Kenya, Nigeria, and operations in collaboration with armies across the continent. It imports billions under AGOA. China is Africa's largest trading partner, with bilateral trade reaching $343 billion in 2025. Multinational corporations from Canada, Europe, Asia are extracting resources, banking profits, and of course, destroying our environment while they do it. This is not the behavior, I would suggest, of a global system that has forgotten Africa. On the contrary, Africa, I would suggest, is central to geopolitical reset. The competition between the US, China, Russia, and the Gulf states is playing out on African soil. The continent is not, I would suggest, an afterthought. It is a theater of operations. So if we are so central, why does it feel like we are being treated as an object rather than subject? Why does the language of co-authorship feel aspirational rather than descriptive? So who is Africa? This brings me to my second point. When we say Africa, we must be precise, because the continent is not homogeneous. It is a terrain of intense internal contradiction. The top 3 African billionaires hold more wealth than the poorest 50% of the continent's population. The top 5% of Africans possess nearly $4 trillion, more than twice the wealth of the other 95%. And crucially, an estimated 75% of the wealth of African multimillionaires and billionaires is held offshore in the banks of Geneva, London, New York, etc. So when we speak of Africa gaining more influence in global trade, whose Africa are we talking about? Is it the Africa of the elite who have mansions in Monaco or Dubai and children in Ivy League universities in the USA and perhaps even in Canada? Or is it the Africa of the majority who are told to tighten their belts while the country's resources finance luxury imports? I remember years ago, a big demonstration by the Ghana trade union movement at the time when structural adjustment was introduced. They had a big banner saying, "We can't tighten our belts, we ate them yesterday." The metaphor of the driver's seat is often used. We say Africa must be in the driver's seat for its own destiny. But let's be clear, be honest. Africa have always been in the driver's seat. Okay, since colonial times, it has been African hands on the steering wheel. It has been African sweat on the leather, African hands shining the wheels, African hands driving the elite. First the colonial elite, now the domestic billionaires, through the pothole streets of our cities. Being in the driver's seat means nothing if you are not the one who decides the destination. But let me come to the Manichean inheritance. This brings me to Frantz Fanon. In The Wretched of the Earth, Les Damnés de la Terre, Fanon described colonial society as Manichean. He meant that it was a world split into two. The settlers' town clean and orderly, and clean by the natives, of course. And the natives' town crowded and chaotic. It was a physical manifestation of a moral division. The colonizer as the absolute good, the epitome of human, the colonized as absolute evil, the less than human. No middle ground, no coexistence. Now, I want to ask you, when you walk through the capital cities of Africa today, Nairobi, Lagos, Johannesburg, Dakar, you name it, do you not see the same Manichean divide? You have the gated communities with 24-hour electricity and private water supplies, and a few kilometers away, you have the sprawling informal settlements, where people live without security, without services, and without dignity. The faces may have changed. The flag may have changed. But has the structure changed? This is the uncomfortable question. Have our post-colonial elites simply replaced, perhaps in modified form, the colonial settler? Are we presiding over a neo-colonial order where exploitation is no longer racialized in the same way it was, but it is just as brutal and just as violent? And if that is the case, then what good is it to give Africa more power in global trade negotiations if that power is concentrated in the hands of a class that has more in common with the global oligarchy than with the people in the native quarters? We cannot have this conversation, I would suggest, in isolation. We're meeting at a moment when the old certainties of the post-colonial Second World War order are crumbling. We're witnessing the destruction and occupation of Palestine and Iran. We have seen military interventions and destabilizations in Libya, Somalia, and the Sahel. We see the rhetoric of great powers treating sovereignty as an inconvenience. Is recolonization on the agenda? Perhaps not always in the old form of direct administration, although perhaps in Palestine that is what is happening. But the logic is the same. The belief that some lives are worth more than others, that some resources can be taken by force, that some people can be sacrificed for the security and prosperity of others. In such a world, what does co-authorship actually mean? Can you co-author a treaty with somebody who holds a gun to your head? Can you negotiate terms with someone who does not recognize your humanity? I will end with a thought from Ghassan Kanafani, the Palestinian writer and revolutionary, who wrote, "Everything in this world can be stolen except one thing: the love that emanates from a human being committed to a conviction or a cause." They can steal our resources. They can rig the terms of trade. They can co-opt our elites. They can bomb our cities, but they cannot steal the conviction of a people who know their cause is just. So as we discuss Africa's future amid the geopolitical reset, let's not just ask how we can get a better deal at the negotiating table. Let us ask a deeper question. What is our conviction? What is our cause? Is it to integrate more smoothly into the global order that is fundamentally unequal? Or is it to build something new? Something that finally breaks the Manichean structure, that reunites the divided city, that ensures that the wealth of the top 5% serves the needs of the 100%. Until we answer that question, colleagues, we remain what we have always been: drivers who do not choose the destination, and negotiators who do not set the terms. Thank you.
Yeah, a lot of very heavy words and heavy ideas to process, with regards to a very activist engagement with a topic, which is what one would typically expect from heroes. Thanks a lot for flagging up these reflections. There are a lot of very interesting points that I see is going to resonate for the rest of the afternoon, deconstructing some of the ideas that have been said and also refining them. And then some of the things that strike me is the idea of treating sovereignty as an inconvenience. These are really heavy words. At this point, I would like to invite Dr. Kamensa to also give us his reflections on the subject.
Thank you very much. Thanks very much for having me here today and for us to look into a question that is very pertinent now, and how Africa could come together and shape its own destiny, given the what is happening around the world, where now it appears power and might is more important than rule-based institutions. And I would come to it from to pick up from where Rose started, but in a different light. And thank you very much. It was a very eloquent presentation. I don't know how we talked that, but I'll take the position to say that I think it's not a question, and I think we've been struggling with this for a long time, thinking that someone has to give us the right for us to integrate. I don't think we need anyone's permission. I think the issue why Africa probably have not come this far is because we see ourselves as we are fragmented in terms of scale. A small country where I was born, Ghana, cannot be in a position to fully negotiate fairly. And from my own experience about the work that I did in the past, you go to trade negotiations. In a country like Ghana or in Malawi, would have one expert in trade. And this person would have to negotiate every aspect of the trade negotiations. Whereas America will come through with about 400 experts, with one specializing in a paragraph of the context of the agreement. Now tell me, no matter how you do it, would that be a fair basis? Because you are looking at which where even the capacity and the skill sets have been skewed towards the bigger powers. But that doesn't mean that I'm here to say that we have to cry and we have to complain that we are all being marginalized and all that. I think we need to think of take a position where we can then say, look, if Mauritius, and I think people who visited, not because Sam is here, but if you visited Mauritius over time, it used to be very dependent on governments and sugarcane. It saw itself that it needs to transform and transformed itself. And now when you go, it's more in the knowledge industry, it has banking, and tourism. And it's turned the corner in that sense. However, Mauritius still is small. My view in this is, the way I would like us to look at it is to say that, why can't we come together as one Africa? Whereby we don't have to, I know that when you talk about integration, people think that we want to have one country called Africa. I mean, I would love that to happen. We have one president, one parliament, one this, but it's impossible. And the reality is what we have to deal with. However, we can come together, allow for some way of negotiating, that we negotiate as a bloc, as Africa. We have a common voice as Africa. And I think that would help in a way from what you're talking about. So in this changing order where might seems to be, I would rather put it that way, that it is not like power is what is dominating. Unfortunately, that is what appears to be the case. I think we'll come back. I think we'll come back in a way where the UN would come back to have its own role and to be in a multilateral organization. We would return to a place where rules would also come back, rule-based institutions come back. But I don't think we should look at it from the point of view that it will be business as it is, it will be with modifications. And therefore, to shape the new global picture, I think Africa would have to integrate and come together with one voice in order to have the rightful place. It's not who would give Africa a seat, but if we are together, that would happen. Why do I believe in that? I believe in the power of integration is because Africa has resources. Africa has resources, and Africa is not as poor as we've been made to believe that we are poor. Africa has critical minerals. The only reason why we are faced with challenges of poverty, as I've already talked about, is because we do not have the right negotiations for our goods. Because DRC, the Democratic Republic of Africa, I'm sorry, Democratic Republic of Congo, where, sorry, not Africa, sorry, I'm sorry, of Congo.
As a wish.
Well, that's perhaps you can see how I'm passionate about getting to West Africa, so that's why I'm talking about DRA rather than DRC. But if DRC goes into these negotiations, from which leverage? What do they have? Right? And at times they do this because of the self-interest of the leadership itself, or self-preservation. So I mean, you all read about it when the DRC leader was telling America, we also have critical minerals. come and negotiate with us. Voila, what did you see? Uganda, Rwanda, and DRC had a negotiation with the Trump, you know? But anyway, I'm not here to talk about that. But the point is, given the geopolitics that is taking place, where might seems to be operating, and now we have the Strait of Hormuz, which is leading to higher oil prices. And you cannot say you sit in Africa somewhere and say it's not going to affect you. The balance sheets of most governments in Africa is now out of the window. The import, the export, those who have oil, like the Nigerians, the Algerians and all that, might be laughing all the way to the bank. But a net importer of oil, like Ghana, Malawi, Lesotho, can't balance it next now. Because whatever projections it made on its budget was based on an oil price, which was around 50 or tops 60. But now this morning it's around 108. So you can see that here's a country that is already debt-laden externally. But why I come back to it, why we need integration is that I'll give you a few statistics. I'll bore you a little bit. When you look at how much does Africa need in terms of become strong, I'm not talking about the 5%, but this is the whole Africa. We need about 190 billion annually if we have to achieve our SDGs, our sustainable development goals, which is by about 4 years, which is a short time, 230. We also need about, in terms of our infrastructure, which is a bit not up to world class, we need about 170 billion annually to bring our infrastructure to where it can support our industries. We also need for agriculture, we need about 53 billion. And for climate change, we need about $2.6 trillion to be able to address the issues of climate change. These are large sums of money, which you might think we don't have. And where are we going to find this? But I would argue that we have it. Africa has the money. It's just that we do not have a proper way of collecting it, a proper way of assessing it. Do you know the remittances from here, from those of you who, like the prof, not me, but the prof, sending money home or money to Mauritius? The total remittances that goes to Africa is 91 billion annually, right? We also have, in terms of remittances, the 91 billion is more than ODA, and it's more than what do you call it? Direct foreign direct investments. It's more than that. We also have pension funds. But these pension funds, if you put it together annually, it's about 470 billion pension funds. We also have, and it's the pension fund, if it's managed, it will grow to about 6.4 trillion by 2050. We also have, in terms of oil resources that you put together, is about now 15% of the collective GDP of Africa, which is more than the 1.7% for foreign direct investment and 2% for ODA. So I'm trying to argue here is that these are the resources that we have. But unfortunately, we have not devised the innovative financial mechanism so that we can collect this. Why should Professor Nuka send money directly? Why can't he buy a securitized remittance so that you can own an equity somewhere, which is for Africa's development? And the return from those equity or the securitized bonds or whatever you want to call it will be the one that you can will go to your loved ones. rather than sending the money. Of course, the money is spent inside is used, but you have to have an organized way of collecting that money. Who earns it? Western Union. Why can't you have more mobile technology to be able to do that? So what I'm arguing here is that we have to find a way that we have formalized our remittances in a way that it is collected in a proper way, so that returns on that will be able to solve, to give to our loved ones. We could also then also explore other issues for our development, which is the bonds, diaspora bonds. Again, instead of sending the money directly, let us own diaspora bonds. And from the returns, you can then give it to your mother or your brother or whoever. So in a sense, we can do this. There's not that things are also not happening at the moment in Africa. We have the African Continental Free Trade Area, which is a way that we've developed in a way that Africa will trade amongst itself, because intra-African trade, trading within the continent, is less than 20%, and we need to do more about it. So in closing, what can I say? I would say that we should continue. We shouldn't continue to feel that we are poor, because nobody is going to come into our aid. I mean, they talk to us this way. It's because people have organized themselves, and those who are powerful are making more money from our resources. But if we come together, we will be able to find a way. So we have to continue. Maybe Bob Marley, we need Bob Marley now to be able to tell ourselves to change our mentality, to believe that we need to come together. Kwame Nkrumah, the first president of Ghana, is the one who told us that, when he said the independence of Africa, of Ghana is doesn't matter until we are all liberated, we are all totally liberated. And now we have to be totally liberated to be able to and to do that, we require that we should have continental unity. Africa has to be united. It shouldn't be looked as a dream anymore. I mean, the unity of Africa is not a dream. It's the way it should be looked at as a strategy, an important strategy if we have to do well. So I would end by saying that in a world where power increasingly shapes the rules, Africa will not be heard because it wants to be heard. Africa will be heard if it acts together and comes together collectively as one. I thank you.
All right, thank you very much. These are two very interesting reflections on the subject. One philosophical, and also the questions of the equity and the governance, and the other dealing with issues of governance, integration, and some of those challenges. We would be interested in the new global terrain, with regards to the reconfigurations or realignments that are taking place in the continent. So the first idea I would like to have both of you reflect in no specific order, please feel free to jump in, is the role of governance in the emergence of the new Africa. The role of governance. This has been implicated when we think of some of the efforts that some more, would we say, progressive or radical, if you think of what's going on in the Sahel, and then what's going on in other parts, and then the new scramble, quote unquote, for Africa. How would we interpret the place of Africa, whether in terms of regions? How are these shifts likely to reshape the most exposed to risks, and which have strategic upside with regard to the continent itself? And I think this ties into what Firo started with about the need not to see Africa as homogeneous. And that problematizes how we look at this. So how do we look at this realignment in terms of the new global terrain and an emerging African terrain that deals with these emerging issues in terms of geopolitical reset, and then the global forces, not just a trade realignment?
That's a a very deep question. And I think a reflection on that, and it's the right question to ask. In terms of when you look at democracy, what type of democracy have we talked about? Or governance? What kind of governance would we want? I think the first place is that Africa itself should agree with itself as to what rules that it wants to have in dealing with the rest of the world. It has to have its own rules. Because if you look at in terms of Africa and the relationship, you have a country, not necessarily criticizing any country, but you see that there are summits in terms of Africa's engagement with the rest of the world. You have Japan, Africa. So one country, 54 heads of states. And mind you, the heads of states will go to Tokyo rather than to come to Addis Ababa for the AU meetings. You have Turkey, Africa. You have India, Africa. Korea, Africa, right? What is the strategy around it? And I think at one point, there's a strategy that we're going to stop having one country and the 54 countries. However, it got changed. So I think we should come up with rules of engagement that we want. That's one in terms of governance. We should also have rules in terms of how leadership roles in Africa we want to have it. 3 countries or 4 countries had a coup d'etat, removed their heads of states. And the African Union decided that the rules of engagement, which they all signed on to, that when you have unconstitutional remove of power, you will be sanctioned from the African Union until you return to the constitutional rule. Guinea has corrected it. You can quibble about how it got there. But in terms of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, they decided that they would walk out of the union completely, have nothing to do with ECOWAS anymore, and they will form their own Sahel Association of Sahelian States. Is that the right approach? I'm not trying to criticize it or not. Well, are they better off where this arrangement is? I don't know the answer to that. So I think we have to agree in that sense. How do we deal with such a thing? How do we want to be governed? Do we want maybe political party system? I'm not an expert in political science, so I don't know if I can speak on that authoritatively. But are we not, if we are not happy with the way of political party system, which by the way has become like the American system, which is very, very, very money intensive, to pardon my language, that if you don't have, you can't be in politics. You know, it's very expensive. And when people get into it, then they have to be paid back. So you have the corruption that happens with that. How do we deal with that? And to deal with that whole idea, then we have to also look into the question of how do you want to conduct elections in Africa? Should there be finance reforms whereby maybe you set a time period where elections should be done, or should all electionary campaign be financed by the government? I don't know the answer to that. So that also will have to look in terms of the type of governance that we have. But I think the centrality of all this argument in terms of governance would be, in terms of my view, as regional integration. And when you go into regional integration, I think countries themselves should be prepared, again, in terms of governance, to give up a little bit of sovereignty for a supra body, you know, that would, like the EU, or which would be able to, you know, address some of these disputes, you know, whatever disputes that it is, to be able to, when countries violate some of the rules that they've all agreed to, they accept the consequences of it, you know, and that would be what else. But I think the centrality of your question would be true regional integration.
Yeah. Yes, so what's your?
Oh, I mean, there's this belief that, you know, if we mimic the imperial interpretation of democracy, parliamentarianism, voting every 5 years, leaves, or does it leave during those 5 years freedom for the elite to eat at the table. Everything that's made. And you know, if we talk about giving up sovereignty, I think this Western parliamentary cretinism, which has been adopted, has actually is a system which allows for the mass of the people to give up their sovereignty and leave it to an elite to run away and rob. Because it's you know, it's like, you know, it reminds me of that song from the Jungle Book. Ooby doo, I want to be like you, walk like you, talk like you. You know, this is what they want to do. They want to be seen as how the West actually organizes. Okay, and it's got nothing to do with democracy. There's nothing about the vast majority of people being able to organize and to give articulation to their own aspirations, to be able to engage in making policy on a local level that makes sense to them. And it's in their interest, not the interest of an elite. And you know, it's in most of our countries, it's just like the American system, where, you know, back, well, century ago, W.B. Du Bois talked about American democracy where there's only one party, but with two uniforms. And certainly in Kenya, that's exactly what we have. And after elections, you know, there's deals done and the opposition party now joins the government and so on, all because they know they can all eat at the table. I think there's a complete dismissal of any meaning to the word democracy, and I think that's really a real tragedy, and it's in a sense a colonial inheritance. Do we not have the capacity as Africans to create the possibilities for our people to organize and to make demands and to give expression to what they require? To form cooperatives, to form other ways of organizing, which meets their needs, not the needs of just the elite. And, you know, democracy, so-called, is just a form that allows the elite to get away and to just fill their stomachs and then move all the money out of the country. You're talking about, you know, making control. 75% of the billionaires in Africa have their monies outside the country. You know, I mean, that's called democracy, and you know, it's completely meaningless. And so, you know, we should try and avoid euphemisms. Which, you know, democracy today is about elections, as if putting a piece of paper every 5 years is going to change your world. It's going to feed you. It's going to give you the means for living a decent life, to give you dignity, to have food on the table. Paper never fed anyone. And so, you know, I really, we have a responsibility to think creatively about what kind of way of organizing should we be encouraging, reflecting on. There's a long history of people organizing. Also, I mean, if one looks during the liberation movement, during the time in the post-Second World War period, it was extraordinary the kind of creativity that flourished across every country. In Kenya, there were organizers of farmers organizing, there were workers organizing in the cities. There were people organizing in all kinds of, there was women's organizations, there were all kinds of ways, people giving expression to the one most important thing, the one word that we've not heard here today. And that's human emancipation. Because that was their aspiration. They were being told that they were less than human. And they fought back to say, no, not only are we human, we are here to invent what it really means to be human. And I think that means that it should be about the struggle for human emancipation, not merely putting paper in a box every 5 years.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting point that you make with regards to the powers. And that reminds me about the sense in which much of the conversations around Africa and development often puts the continent in the sense of victimhood. So I do hear a sense in which there is an argument for more agency, to say, how do you take the destiny in their own hands? So that leads to questions of strategy and bargaining. How does Africa gain a seat and shape the terms? Only recently, one of the African countries in conversations with one of the imperial centers with regard to support with aid, drugs, had requested that would only be possible if they were going to allow access to the minerals. So there is that kind of condition. I think some of you may have come across that news. I don't want to be very specific with the country, but this is the kind of bargaining, that some of these countries face, African countries, one that's in many cases critical on survival. So given this kind of idea and also the very resonating statement by our Prime Minister about middle power, what are the real ways that these African countries or African can gain a seat and shape the terms? Do they have to use this very mercantile language? Do they have the cards?
They do. I think they do. The question is that in terms of Africa, in terms of the mineral resources that it has, again, if we have to take a very humane approach, then if you see where are these critical minerals located, it's in the Sahel. And yes, there's a line that you can go, and then you can, like I said, from Dakar, you walk your way, you bring it down to southern part of Africa. It's just that we don't know how we can collectively, the question you're talking about, what you're talking about the rich people in Africa, you ask them, they will say that they worked for it and it's their own money, and therefore they can choose to do whatever they want to do at the time. You can debate that, but the reality of it is that, look, the reason why these monies are outside is because from where I come from, we've experienced coup d'etats, and you find when a coup d'etat comes in, your assets are seized, and you have no way of getting it back. So people then become wise and say, which is unfortunate. I'm not trying to justify it in any way, shape, or form. But it's just that these business people realize that because of future, they want to protect it. And they think they are better off to protect it by leaving it somewhere outside the continent. Of course, we don't have resources to it. And when they die, nobody can even get it. And then the monies are lost. So I take that. And I take the point that you're also making, that we have to find a better way of representation, a better way of making our voices heard from the villages and all that. But at the other side of the story is that, and I keep using, my example is Ghana, but it happens in many African countries. Someone is a poor person in the village. He's having difficulties in terms of meeting ends meet. He gets the opportunity to lead his people, his community in parliament, overnight, the guy has put up 3 buildings. The guy is driving the best cars in the world. So I don't know what the answer it is to in terms of corruption, whether it's, I don't know. It's just that we don't have the proper incentives. We do not have the proper mechanisms to correct these mistakes, where this corruption, how do we address it? We can, yes, we all want to be human. But the challenge for us is that once you bring this humanity argument, this is where the pastors then get us. Then you get a pastor who say, look, preaches us to in terms of it becomes a religious thing, right? That you being told that you should become humane, whereas the pastor himself is enjoying himself from your collections that you are putting in. So I think the question is, I agree with you that we have to find a way in terms of addressing the representation. But I think that the way the structure, democracy, or whether you want to call it West or East or whatever, may not be perfect, right? May not be perfect. But how can we then, given what we have, because I do not think that we should also go back to a system where you have traditional leaders who are controlling and who are traditional leaders because of what do you call it, by birth, by blood lineage, right? You don't want the situation where you have people seize power, come into power, transform themselves into so-called democracy, and then rule forever and say they are the ones who know the answers. Because when they come in the same way as you are talking about. They are humane. They are going the bush and complain that, the poor is disenfranchised. The poor doesn't have what. And then when they come in, after a few years, they are worse than the one who was there before. So I don't know the model for us. But can we work within what we have now? I'm just saying, within what we have now, can we make it better? Can we make it more representational? Can we make it in a way that it addresses some of the issues that we have? Because I think in the end of the day, what we want is, how can we lift most of our people from poverty?
Well, look, first of all, there is no such thing as poverty. Okay, there is impoverishment. Okay, people are not poor, they are made poor. Okay, I think it's really important. I'm not talking about being humane. I'm talking about being human, being recognized for our humanity. And it's not a matter of better representation. It's a matter of better presentation. Let the oppressed, let the disenfranchised, let the wretched of the earth present themselves and organize their societies in a way that is in their own interest. It's not a matter of finding some NGO or some MP to represent you. No, that has completely been a failure, and a complete and utter failure. America, so-called born in democracy, the original democracy of the USA, of the American, was only white male slave owners were allowed to vote. They created what democracy created, what liberalism created, was two spaces, two zones, two spheres. One, the sacred space where these whites could say, we are human. We are the epitome of being human. And the rest are the sacrifices. And our history has been a struggle between these two zones, where women were denied the franchise, fought for it, where the colonial people had to fight and give up blood to be able to get some form of independence. It was done through presentation, not representation. And I think it really brings me to this issue about Carney, this banker who the Canadians have elected. I want to make it absolutely clear from my point of view. When I heard his speech in Davos, for which he got standing ovation from the Western world, from the white Western world. It was the most profoundly racist statement I have heard in years. Why? Because he was affronted that the USA should want to seize Greenland, doing to us what we've been doing to the Africa and Asia and Latin America. Yeah. And then suddenly Trump goes all hell for Iran. And what does he do? He says, oh yeah, I'm supporting you. Nobody even asked him. He says, oh, I'm supporting you. A fucking racist. Okay, because he can say that because, of course, it doesn't matter about these black people sitting out in the middle, in the West Asia. It doesn't matter about these Africans because they're less than human. This is an admission that he believes all these others are less than human. And I cannot think of a better definition for the term racism than that. And you know, but newspapers completely let him get away with it. And okay, so we should not be surprised that a banker should be racist. I mean, you know, they all are. Okay, their business is to extract wealth. Okay, and what better way to do it than from the less than human, because that's how the system works.
Okay, I'm just keeping an eye on our time, and we're going to take this last round, and then we can open it up. Listening to this conversation so far, I'm really interested in what I see as internal and external reset in the geopolitics that we're talking about here. The geopolitical reset. Internal, we can look at what's happening in the continent, you know, with some countries realigning, pulling out from some unions and forming another. In other words, and then also recalibrating their relationship with Western or European powers, you know, in terms of their engagement. In terms of engagement is also changing with regard to some of this. So the point is, given this kind of dynamic, and then globally, we're seeing some of these geopolitical reset as well, with Kani actually being a very mobile prime minister, you know, trying to build the new bridges and so on. Given this kind of scenario, one, the internal, you know, geopolitical reset of the continent, and the redefinition of terms of engagement, and the external one that we are witnessing, you know, also with the idea of the middle power. How do we avoid a new scramble for Africa, and how would Africa, you know, deal with the emerging challenges that will lead to possibly the revolution of the proletariat?
But I mean, here we are in Canada, and if you look across Africa, look across Latin America, the mining, Canadian mining companies are one of the biggest players in Africa, and who are robbing the place and destroying our environment. You know, even the water, we have somebody from Mining Watch Canada here who's written huge amounts. So I hope you will have an opportunity to make a contribution on this discussion, because it is for us here to take on the carnies and the corporations which are registered here in Canada, in these mining companies, to make their life difficult and insist that they do not exploit in that way. It is for us to do that here, because there's always far too much, what should Africa do? Okay, as opposed to what should we be doing here that will support the struggles of it. And I think that's the way we have to turn this around. And there are opportunities. I mean, and what these mining companies are doing in Africa, they're doing just up over there. Okay, they're doing amongst indigenous populations here in exactly the same companies are doing the same thing here with the indigenous populations as they're doing in Africa with the indigenous populations there. So I think we need to bring these things together and say, what do we do about it?
Yes.
Yeah, I think, well, I would really argue for stand on the point that I think we should take a pragmatic approach. I totally agree with you that in terms of geopolitics, in terms of might carries the day. I don't think I always wake up in the morning thinking that they'll get a news flash that the war is stopped. What is going on in Iran is wrong in all these aspects. I don't think whether it's an American who dies or Iranian, we are all human beings and we all deserve dignity. And we should not be in a position whereby you wake up and say, the leader of Iran is wrong and we are counting and we feel proud that we are decapitating and using all these terms. I think it's wrong and it gives a very wrong notion. But that is the way the present leadership of the US wants to operate. But coming to Africa, I think all that you're saying, I agree. However, we have to be pragmatic in the way that we approach this. That if we go into a class war in terms of whites versus non-whites and all that, I think it will be a challenge for us in the sense that I'm not saying we shouldn't voice out injustices. We should. If there's any injustice, we should call it out. I agree with you that there are a lot of mining operations in Africa is being done by Canadian companies, which is true. But so we should call out what they are doing wrong. If they are destroying the environment, we should call it out. But at the same time, if you're talking about mining, sure that, again, I'm bringing Ghana as an example. There are these artisanal miners who are also destroying their own environment, which we call it in Ghana, Galamsey, and which is also wrong in that sense. And, you know, young people, perhaps lack of jobs, are digging into the trying to find minerals on it. And so that they are destroying the environment. But I want to step aside and say, look, let's take a pragmatic approach. We own the resources. How can we add value to those resources? And so therefore, we should then begin to look at beneficiation issues of our minerals. Botswana, in its negotiation with the DBS, have been able to come up with that agreement in terms of have beneficiations of their diamonds. You know, because the fact of the matter is that Africa may not have the means to even exploit those resources that we have. Right? We may, you know. So whatever you do, you would have to look for if you want to exploit, except if we say, look, we want to leave it under the ground, that's a different question. But if you want to exploit it, you have to find partnerships. Perhaps maybe why I argue about, I come in terms of pragmatism, is to find a way that the negotiation is fair. That is why when we were at ECA and discussed that, there was something which we call the Africa Mining Vision, which tends to lay out a framework in which these things have to be carried out. Maybe we should revisit it and see how those things will be addressed. We also do know that we lag behind industrialization, right? Again, another pragmatic approach would say, look, can we look at it rather than selling cocoa directly as raw form to the West or wherever it is? Can we produce chocolates instead? Can we produce finished products with our food stuff so that we have year-round food security, right? You know, so those things are the practical approaches that we should take. But I'll come back again.
Yeah.
On integration, we have to have free movement of people. We don't require visas to go from A to B, country A to B. You should let Africans roam freely on the continent. And we should look into financial integration whereby resources will be pulled together to be able to support investments in Africa. So
Right.
I'll take a pragmatic approach.
All right, thank you for suggesting the pragmatic approach. There are a number of issues that we would have gone into, but one of them would have been how can Africa convert resource demand, particularly critical minerals, into industrial upgrading rather than deeper extraction? And there are a number of these issues, and also what role can the diaspora networks play, in terms of some of these conversations, considering people who live in the diaspora and what kind of critical roles they can play along the lines that Bureaus have suggested. And then also, are they in a position to play those kind of roles? There are a number of issues here that we do not want to extend further, but we just want to cycle back and head towards opening up for conversations with the floor. But before then, I would like to invite my colleague Teddy to just offer a quick intervention.
I will be very brief. I don't think it will surprise you that much of what Joe said. It's as if I'm listening to myself. Because we're trained as economists and we tend to have very practical and pragmatic ways of looking at issues. And so I would echo his views of value addition for resources, industrialization, better integration. And I think where I would maybe push Joy a little bit on, and maybe Feroz as well, is the track record in terms of regional integration in Africa is not a good one. And so what is different now? Why are you a bit more optimistic than I am? It would be one. And I guess part of it is also in reaction to what you had mentioned in your initial remarks, which is the example that you provided of countries negotiating bilateral deals with the United States is a classic one, right? Countries are looking for their own interest and they're not thinking about the collective. And so so I'm not disagreeing with you about integration, but how do you avoid these issues where countries are negotiating these side deals, which undermines essentially the African project? So that would be one of them. The second issue I want to maybe offer just a little comment on is, I'm not a political scientist. I happen to have worked with many political scientists, and we just finished an edited volume on democracy and development in Africa. My co-editor is at the back, Sandra Oloruntova, Dr. Oloruntova, who's a professor here with IAS. And one of the things that came out, and the book will be out in a few months, one thing that really came out of the chapters, which we asked scholars in Africa to do, if you look at Afrobarometer surveys, for example, Africans want democracy. It doesn't matter how you ask the question. Overwhelmingly, you look at different age groups, you look at gender, you look at different countries. Africans want democracy. So the question is not really about whether democracy is the system that we should be having or not, because we don't have a better system. And so, but the question is, what are these democracies doing for them? And I think this is where you're going to see a lot of dissatisfaction, which is the reality that these democracies, even where we've had regular elections, they have not delivered for people. I happen to come, and you've mentioned Mauritius. Mauritius is an interesting case. And I think what made the difference is that Mauritian government, since independence, have delivered. They've provided services to people. People pay taxes, and they receive something in return, which is what normally you would expect to see in most societies. And yet, in many places in Africa, when you ask people, they tell you, no, my government is not doing anything for me. I don't get the services that I want. Educational quality is terrible. I don't get the healthcare that I want. I don't get regular law and order, security. Garbage is not collected. Everything that you would expect from a government is not being given to you. And now what you also see, because in Africa, much of a population is very young, you have this increasingly educated population at a very, who are median age in the 20s. There's no jobs for them. And so what do you expect they will do if continuously they've been promised things, and when they are not receiving the services, the basic things that they should be receiving from their government? And so these are challenging issues that I would put back to you, because I think this is where we need to be much more pragmatic. The African population the demographics are pretty clear. If you don't create jobs over the next 10 to 15 years, you have, potential demographic dividend, but you could also have a time bomb, which is lots of young people who are not going to have jobs and who won't know what to do. And that leads to all kinds of social problems if you're not able to meet their demand. So, so yes, we should be pragmatic, but I think we should also be asking these very profound questions, which is, how do we address these problems? How do we deliver that? How do we create an environment where people can thrive? And this is where I will be very pragmatic like you, which is to say that, yes, I believe in integration and I believe in the power of, economic systems to effect change, but we need to think about how we can do this. And that I think is the missing part there, which is, we know what to do, but how do we get there, right? That to me is the challenge. So thank you for.
All right, thank you, Teddy. Just to return us to the title of our roundtable, Dialogue on Africa's Future Amid Ongoing Geopolitical Reset and Global Trade Realignment. And so I would, at this point, exercise my prerogative as a moderator and not get the two speakers to respond immediately to Teddy, but to put this at the back of their mind while we invite questions and comments from the audience, including the folks who are online. I do hope that as we answer that, we're going to wrap up, not just focusing so much on Africa's pathologies, but also the sense in where the future has some kind of positive ring to it, as much as possible. So, ladies and gentlemen, please, questions, just give your name and your program, and then please ask a question or make a comment. Keep it very concise. Yes. And then if you're online, please feel free to post your question on the chat. But also, as a matter of fact, I would like to see some of your faces, by turning on your camera and asking a question. Do we have any questions from online? We'll be waiting for that while we take questions from the floor. Yes.
My name is Chike Oke. I finished from the Department of Anthropology, did my PhD last year. So my question is about population. I feel like it's an underlying issue in a lot of these conversations. On the one hand, optimists believe that Africa's population is its wild card, positive, social capital, human capital, that Africa can really, or African countries can really bank on this resource. But on the other hand, there is also this pessimism about Africa's teeming population being a sort of anomaly, a sort of disadvantage in a sense. And we see that also in the way that foreign interests also in the sector intervene in Africa. We see the idea of Bill Gates and some other interests also reaching sort of control or comment or whatever, right, on the population issue. So how do you, conceive this issue of population? Do you see what do you think Africa should do with, about, or for its population?
Yeah, so we take about 3 questions and then we can answer. Yes.
I have 2 questions. One for Dr. Manchin. You mentioned the implications of giving the trade terms to Africa's political elites and what that would mean for people on the ground and how that better disenfranchise people on the ground. And so for him, my question is, how do we move forward from that? How do we, what tools of accountability can be used to hold our political elites, too? And for Dr. Atamelifa, you mentioned the possibilities of formalizing remittances and what that would mean to, see some form of economic growth on the continent. But then we have about 140 billion, that leaves the continent. 3 different means, right? Illicit, financial flows to, mining and all of these, ways through which we lose out on this, you know, having a homegrown economic, development. So I'm wondering, if we have this much cleaving a continent, what do we do with that? How do we restructure these economic, extractions that takes place in the continent, and what that would mean for the future of, continents.
All right, thank you. Yes.
Yeah. So
Please name
my name is Jamie Mean. I'm with Mining Watch Canada. And I guess my my question is, related to the question of illicit financial flows. How we address the structural question of licit financial flows. As Professor Patrick Bond is fond of pointing out, the structural nature of colonial capitalism is foreign direct investment is to extract benefits, is to extract wealth. It's not to do anything charitable for the economies that the investment is flowing into, and so that investment is returning multiplied to the investor externally. At the same time, and Rose mentioned the question of Canadian mining companies, the one law that applies to the operation of Canadian corporations internationally is the Prevention of Corruption, the Foreign Corrupt Officials Act, which is spectacular in the absence of its enforcement. We recall this SNC Lavalin scandal, and at the point where it would have actually made a difference somewhere, actually related to North Africa. But the point being that we've been struggling for 2 decades now to try and push the Canadian government to implement some mechanism of accountability, never mind restriction on the activity of Canadian mining corporations, at the same time as they're able to do whatever they can get away with in the countries they're operating in. So, and some egregious human rights and environmental damages are on the table, with credible documentation, so forced relocation, extreme violence, extreme pollution, and the local authorities are not able to combat this, and yet the only, and we have no mechanism to do that. So, what's that? And how do we restructure that? Because I see, I don't want to go on too long, but I see the real issue being the structural one, where apparently the most ambitious plan of the African Development Bank for the Democratic Republic of Congo is to initiate some local beneficiation for copper and cobalt within the country. That's not what's happening, but that was the ambition. And the point is to move from the bottom 1% of the value added, which is the raw material, to 3% by being able to sell smelted material. So there's no way that Germans are going to give up the battery manufacturing jobs. But that's the issue, because that's where the money is.
All right. Thank you very much. Okay, let's make it 4. We are at 2:05, and I'm looking at us rounding up by 2:15. Thereabout. Yes, go ahead.
My name is Rose. I'm a PhD student in African Studies. So my question is to you, Dr. Atamensah. You mentioned that Africans want democracy, and I think it's the electorate way of having that element of political participation. And you mentioned that Dr. Atamensah, you mentioned that Africans can move back to, they can return to the traditional rulership system because we are way past that from the pre-colonial times. So my question to you is, within this framework of the persistence of democratic structures, how can Africa utilize the democratic structures in global relationships? How can they position them in the way they negotiate their positionalities and their basically their status within global systems and interrelationships.
Yes, so we will have to take this round of questions. Yes, we have, we'll take the next round from the folks online. So please just stick around. I would ask the speakers to keep the response short as much as possible while doing justice to it, so that we can take this next round of questions from the participants online. Yes, who wants to go first?
You always give me the topic. So, TK, your question about demographic dividends, I think that's what you were asking, and then you talk about foreign interest in that. I think, as he said, Africa has a youthful population, right? And in all these discussions, what are we going to do about it? It's an asset to us that, in terms of relative to other parts of the world, Africa would have people less than 24 or so, or even the year of the youth, whether if you want to project it to 30. Most of them will be African, right? And where are they going to find those jobs? I have a daughter who struggles in finding a job, right? And I'm sure a lot of you are struggling to find a job, and the jobs are not there. Now, if somebody would argue that it's better to have an educated unemployed than uneducated unemployed, that's what some of the leaders make that. So the question is, we need to find jobs for all of them. So I think we have to also try and look at it from that point of view, is to see how we approach the whole idea of jobs. Most of us think that go to university, get out, and then there'll be a job there. The government has to give you a job, which is fine. The government has some responsibility. But I think what we could also look at it is that, can we change that mindset? Say that we provide the enough tools where the young people themselves can be more creative to create their own jobs, right? Can we be more creative in the sense that the fact that you are a Ghanaian doesn't mean that you should only search for jobs within Ghana. Perhaps we can broaden it in a way that, as a youth coming from Ghana, you may be allowed to go to Cote d'Ivoire at the minimum to even teach English, and vice versa. So therefore, in this case, we have to have a program whereby accreditation, university accreditation, I'm not talking about when you have a degree from Canada, you go back anywhere in Africa, it's not a problem. But if I got a degree from Ghana, would it be accepted in Malawi? So we have to see how we can reconcile accreditation, say that skill sets will be allowed. And embedded in that will be the idea of having free movement of people. And when I say free movement of people, it includes the fact that you have the right of residence, that you can choose to say that I'm going to live in Malawi. That's your choice, right? So is that like a way in Canada you can move anywhere you want? Africa should think about free movement in that regard, in order to address that question. Since Rose is leaving, let me see if I can answer your question before you go.
Sorry.
Yeah.
And then Rose, let me start with pizza or something before leaving.
Yeah. And the question of you raised in terms of democracy and how it can be used in the global place, I think in terms of if we get it right and we're able to elect the proper people, right, and they give us good representation, then in terms of where they represent us in the global place, they'll find a way of collecting whatever, find a mechanism where our views will be heard and collectively be heard in the multilaterals like the UN and all that. So I think the question what you raised, if we can get the proper people to represent us, perhaps it may not be perfect, but maybe they'll be able to address your question. That's it. I think.
Yes.
Yeah, let me stop here for time reasons.
Yes, so that Rose can quickly.
Yeah, I didn't.
Very quickly, I'm inspired by our youth and the growth of these young people. Look at what Gen Z are doing in Kenya, for example. Okay, they are in the process of creating another world. You know, what is really fascinating, I mean, I'd love to know where else this is happening. But in Kenya now, there are in most of the cities and outside cities too, there are regular meetings. We call Bunge la Mwananchi, the People's Parliament. And these are happening regularly. There are farmers, there are women's organizations, there are all kinds of people getting together. And it's not voting, it's discussing the issues that are concerning them and finding a consensus about how do we deal with this. You know, they've been waiting and being promised for decades that things will be better, that democracy will deliver to them, and it hasn't. And so they're saying, well, if you will listen, we will take to the streets to make the demands that we think need to be made. And it ties to this whole issue of corruption and accountability. Because of the problem is that, you know, the state is a honeypot. If you occupy the state, you have access to, you know, like the flies come into the pot. Okay? And if there's a deal being done, it'll be the state which will be, members of the government who will be negotiating that. And you think they'll be acting against their own personal interests? No, they will make deals. And it's not unusual for that. It depends on how you define what corruption is. Corruption is paying the odds on a little bit above what it actually costs. Okay? Who pays rent here? Okay, you know what corruption is. It's the difference. And rent is a fundamental nature of corruption. When you make a phone call, you know, I've talked to these people on these telephone companies. You want to call Johannesburg from here, it doesn't cost a shit. It doesn't cost anything. How much do they charge you? But that's corruption. Okay, the extra bit to get the service you need. It's built into the system. It's built into the system. And I think there are things worth looking. I mean, for example, you know, was it Niger which was selling mining uranium, and they were being forced by France to sell it for $3 a kilo. Now, whereas the international price was 30 or 300 a kilo, they have changed things around. They are not paying, they're not selling it for $3. Why is it that they were able to do that? I think we have to ask that kind of question, because the rest of us are still paying $3 when we actually, it's not valuing the labor that has gone into producing whatever it is that we're giving away.
Yeah, thank you so much, Firoz, for that. We'll turn to our colleagues online. Please, can I see those questions or comments? Could you help read them out?
So we have a question from.
And then we'll just wrap up.
Would you want to give them the opportunity to?
Go ahead and then, no, let's have them. They've already put out a question, so we
Okay,
can.
so the first question is from Dennis, and it says, where do you think, it's not addressed to any particular speaker, but it says, where do you think is the African leadership now to potentially lead a continental transformative process to bring together the national and regional leadership?
Okay, the second one.
The second one is from Paul, says, building on the last question and in the spirit of imagining otherwise, there past or present African economic systems or structures or tradition that may prove promising for facilitating the development of a more representative democratic society? And the third question is from Gina, a second year NUPSIA student. And this particular question is addressed to Professor Teddy. Yeah, it says, a recent estimate suggests the United States has only a couple of months of supply of rare earth mineral for military use. As the global demand intensifies, how realistic is it to build a partnership with resource-rich African countries, particularly in the context where the resource cost poses a significant barrier? And from a different perspective, is it truly in our economic interest to support the development of African industrial capacity, given that Canada is also resource-rich and often seen as a more stable partner in the global supply chain?
Right, so, yes, Blair?
Just a quick question. It's a great discussion. I'm just curious if you could reflect a little bit about kind of an earlier discussion of enthusiasm of changing geopolitics, not the Arab Spring or I remember you had pointed the book for roles and all the excitement about all the changes and getting rid of Mubarak and stuff, and and then what happened, right? All the enthusiasm for all the changes, Egypt, Tunisia, Libya, Syria. Why was that? I mean, that I think it's something to reflect on. Not only the geopolitics of course, NATO bombing Libya, but of course, Turkey, Egypt, Gulf states. How does that reflect in terms of looking in Kenya now? What are the dangers for the movements going on aside, in addition to the Kenyan government, of course? What are other things at work that might minimize potential for change? I think we all have great ideas, but the question is the politics, really. And of course, on the day when CAF overturned the AFCON final, I think people are thinking we don't have too much faith in the continental bodies right now.
So I'm going to give the speakers 2.5 minutes each max, so that we can wrap up and then end the session.
Very quickly, have a look at what's going on in Bahrain at the moment. Bahrain was actually part of that uprising and was brutally massacred. Okay, and I believe that in the next period we will see the resurgence, maybe an Arab summer. Okay.
Or winter.
Well, but it's an important question because what has happened in Gaza, what's happening in Palestine, I think is a future mirror for many of us. That they are experimenting with a way of crushing resistance that will be used against us. It's already being used across the border with ICE, using exactly the same technologies, the same methods, and so on. Just on the point of democracy, very quickly, we really should go back and look at our own histories. In Guinea-Bissau, okay, the PAIGC, the party, the Independence Party, they at the time just before independence, they had controlled 2/3 of the terrain of Guinea-Bissau. 2/3. They had created hundreds of village committees, etc., which determined policies from agriculture to education to even defense in each of these communities. Okay, it was an extraordinary experiment of democracy. And what they did was they banned Portuguese currency. They didn't replace it by anything else. In other words, they banned money. By banning money, you completely undermine and you destroy capital because there's no basis for accumulation. And that was perhaps why Amilcar Cabral was assassinated. But there are some really positive lessons to be learned from that. And too often we're looking at elsewhere when on our terrain in many countries, there is a wealth of experience that we need to look into and learn from. And you're doing PhDs, have a look at how did democracy evolve organically in Africa, not imported at a cost.
Thank you so much, Firoz. And then, yes,
Well,
that's Joe. Keep it short too.
I'll be short. I mean, but thank you again for getting me here. And let me quickly use my time to talk about the illicit financial flows, which Jamie and Shika talked about. I think we all know that it's an important issue for Africa. So that's why the African Union itself had President Thabo Mbeki to look into it, in which they found that about 80 billion, and it could be even more, is leaving the continent through illicit financial flows. They may be right, because in terms of the way the protocols or policies are, it is well organized. But it is illegal because it is done through mispricing, misinvoicing, and at times you don't have the skills to do it. The last point is that in terms of some of the issues raised in the questions, I think industrialization is what Africa needs in order to address those value chain, value addition, and supply chain. We have to build our own supply chains in order to address them. And I would end by saying we want to be progressive. We want to be part of the discussion. If we want to change the world, we should integrate.
All right, thank you so much for this. I think this is the much we can take. I regret that we can't extend this conversation. We're already run out of time. And I want to thank you for making our time to join us this afternoon for this very robust panel. Please, could you give a round of applause? And then, if I may, would you give another round of applause to our graduate students who have been. So just to put this again on your calendar, on the 1st, we have a graduate, we have a professional development event where we have a guest speaker, a very distinguished guest speaker. And then we also do have our brand bag continuing. We want to put these events on your calendar. We have a literary event on the 2nd at the bookstore. It's the first time we're using the bookstore for a literary event. We have this visiting scholar, Professor Nimi Wariboko, who is also going to be launching his new book published by Gwaneka Editions. And he'll be doing also his book, reading from his book on Biafra. It's 50 years of Biafra this year. So there's a lot of, it's on the 2nd of April. We'll send out more information so that you can keep track of that. On this note, we want to thank you and thank you again for coming. It's a very busy time of the semester, so thank you for continuing to support the Institute of African Studies. And then we thank NIFSIA and then my administrators, who are always working behind together with the administrator of NIFSIA to get this event together. On this note, I would like us, just as a way of also thinking of a positive note for Africa, to give ourselves a round of applause and wish ourselves really well. So we do have, we got pizza, knowing that it's lunchtime and you've been here, and then we have some other refreshments. Please help yourself as much as possible, and don't hesitate to also do a little judge of the post. Let's take a photograph. Let's take a photo. The question was. Let's stay in this one. Yeah, so that website, make sure you have a all right, thank you. And then for those of you who may have missed any part of it, we will have this upload edited and posted on YouTube. So we have it on our channel. We make it one as well. Yes. All right, that's great.
But yeah, I'm really interested in having time.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Ideally, maybe
Yeah, I can ask my assistant to put you on the thing.
Yeah, good, you give 3 years here. That's the part, that's the whole first year, kind of figure out first year, how to do that.